The gunshot echoed through the Montana night before Sienna Walsh even realized she had fired, the revolver still smoking in her trembling hands as the coyote yelped and fled into the darkness beyond the chicken coop. She stood there in her borrowed nightdress and boots, heart hammering against her ribs, watching the hens settle back into their restless clucking. It was past midnight in Helena, Montana, in the summer of 1882, and she had no business being out here in a stranger's yard. But conscience had driven her from her bed at the boarding house 3 properties down when she had seen him ride past her window hours earlier, slumped in his saddle with exhaustion. And she had remembered what her father always said about chickens needing their evening feed. The back door of the ranch house slammed open with such force it bounced against the wall. A man stood silhouetted in the doorway, tall and broad-shouldered, holding a rifle that he lowered slowly as he took in the scene before him. Sienna felt her face burn with embarrassment even in the cool night air. "I am so sorry," she said quickly, setting the revolver down on the fence post with shaking hands. The man stood perfectly still for a long moment, and Sienna wished desperately that the earth would open up and swallow her whole. Then he stepped down from the porch into the moonlight, and she could see his face properly for the first time. He was younger than she had thought from a distance, perhaps 26 or 27, with dark hair that fell across his forehead and eyes that seemed to hold both exhaustion and something else she could not quite name as he looked at her. "You fed my chickens," he said slowly, as if testing the words to see if they made sense. "Yes," Sienna admitted, wrapping her arms around herself. "I brought over some of the grain from the boarding house supply. Mrs. Henderson will not miss it. I will pay her back from my wages. At midnight." "Well, I noticed around 8 o'clock, but I thought perhaps you would remember and do it yourself, so I waited. But then it got later and later, and I kept thinking about those poor hens going hungry, and finally I just could not stand it anymore, so I came over." The words tumbled out of her in a rush. "I truly am sorry for the intrusion, Mr. Grayson," he said, moving closer. "Grayson Cross, and you are Miss Walsh from the boarding house. I have seen you hanging laundry in the yard." Sienna felt her cheeks grow even warmer at the knowledge that he had noticed her. She had certainly noticed him over the 3 weeks since she had arrived in Helena to work for Mrs. Henderson. Grayson Cross owned the small ranch on the edge of town, ran cattle and horses, and kept mostly to himself according to the other boarders. He was polite when he came into town for supplies but never stayed long enough for socializing. "I am," she confirmed. "And I really should be getting back before Mrs. Henderson realizes I am gone and worries." "You saved my chickens from a coyote," Grayson said, and there was something almost wondering in his tone. "And you fed them because you thought I had forgotten." "You did forget," Sienna pointed out gently. The feed bucket was still full in the coop house, and the hens were quite agitated. He ran a hand through his hair, and she saw the weariness etched deep in his face. "I did forget. I have been riding fence lines for 3 days trying to find where my cattle keep getting out. I rode in tonight and just collapsed into bed without thinking. Those chickens belonged to my mother. She died 6 months ago. I promised her I would take care of them." The pain in his voice made Sienna's heart ache. "I am sure she would understand that you were exhausted." "That does not make it right," Grayson said quietly. He looked at her, really looked at her, and Sienna felt something shift in the air between them. "Thank you, Miss Walsh, truly. I do not know many people who would have gone to such trouble for a stranger's livestock." "It was no trouble," Sienna said, though her legs were trembling from the aftermath of fear and excitement. "Though I apologize for using your revolver without permission. It was hanging by the coop door, and when I saw the coyote I just grabbed it." A small smile tugged at the corner of Grayson's mouth, the first she had seen from him. "My mother's revolver. She was a crack shot. I think she would have approved of you using it to protect her hens." They stood there in the moonlight, the chickens settling down to sleep behind them, and Sienna knew she should leave but found herself reluctant to break this strange, fragile moment. Grayson seemed to feel the same way, shifting his weight but making no move to go back inside. "Would you like some coffee before you go back?" he asked suddenly. "It seems the least I can offer after you came all this way." Sienna knew she should refuse. It was improper for a single woman to be alone with a single man in his home, especially at this hour. But there was something in his eyes, a loneliness that matched the hollow ache she had been carrying since her father's death 3 months ago, that made her nod. "Just for a few minutes," she said. "Mrs. Henderson goes to bed early, but she sometimes wakes in the night." Grayson's kitchen was clean but sparse, the kind of space that spoke of a man who ate to survive rather than for pleasure. He lit a lamp on the table and stoked the fire in the stove, setting a battered coffee pot over the heat. Sienna stood awkwardly near the door until he pulled out a chair for her. "Please sit. You look like you have had a shock." She had. Her hands were still shaking slightly as she sank into the chair. "I have never shot at anything living before," she confessed. "My father taught me how to handle a gun, but I never actually had to use one for real." Grayson poured water from a pitcher into the coffee pot and added grounds from a tin. "You did well. That coyote will think twice before coming back." He turned to look at her. "Your father taught you about chickens too." "He taught me about everything," Sienna said, her throat tightening. "We had a small farm in Ohio. He raised me alone after my mother died giving birth to me. It was just the two of us for 21 years until a fever took him in March." She had not meant to say so much, but something about the quiet kitchen and Grayson's steady presence made the words flow. "The bank took the farm for debts. A cousin found me this position in Helena through a church network. I have been here 3 weeks." "I am sorry about your father," Grayson said, and the simple sincerity in his voice was more comforting than any of the elaborate condolences she had received. "It is hard, losing the person who taught you about the world." "Yes," Sienna whispered. "It is." The coffee began to percolate, filling the kitchen with its rich aroma. Grayson brought down 2 tin cups and set them on the table, then folded himself into the chair across from her. In the lamplight, she could see the details of his face more clearly. The strong jaw, the slight crook in his nose that suggested it had been broken once, the calluses on his hands that spoke of hard work. He was handsome in a rough, weathered way that made something flutter low in her belly. "My mother died in February," he said, pouring the coffee when it was ready. "My father passed when I was 14, so I have been running this place alone for 12 years now. But having her here, even just knowing she was in the house, it made it feel less empty. Now I come home and there is just silence." "That is the worst part," Sienna agreed, wrapping her hands around the warm cup. "The silence. No one to talk to about your day, no one who cares about the small things that happened." They sat in comfortable quiet for a moment, sipping their coffee. Outside, an owl hooted and the chickens made soft sleeping noises. "What do you do at the boarding house?" Grayson asked. "Everything," Sienna said with a small laugh. "Cook, clean, do laundry, mend linens, help with the garden. Mrs. Henderson is kind, but she runs a tight ship. We have 8 boarders right now, all men working at the mines or the railroad. They are decent enough but rough. I spend most of my time trying to get their clothes clean enough to be presentable." "That sounds like hard work." "It is," Sienna admitted, "but it is honest work, and Mrs. Henderson pays fairly and does not ask too many questions about my past. I am grateful for it, even if it is not what I imagined for my life." "What did you imagine?" Grayson asked, and there was genuine curiosity in his eyes. Sienna felt herself blush again. "This will sound silly," Try me. I wanted a farm of my own, she said quietly. Not a large one, just enough to grow food and raise some animals and maybe have a family. My father and I used to talk about it on winter evenings, planning what we would plant and where we would build. After he died, that dream died with him. A woman alone cannot get land or credit, and I have no dowry to make myself an attractive marriage prospect. So now I wash other people's clothes and try not to think too much about what might have been. Grayson was quiet for a long moment, his dark eyes fixed on her face. That does not sound silly at all, he said finally. It sounds like a good dream. Something in his tone made Sienna look up sharply, but his expression was carefully neutral as he drank his coffee. The clock on the wall chimed 1 in the morning, making her jump. I really must go, she said, standing quickly. Mrs. Henderson will have my hide if she finds my bed empty. Grayson stood as well, moving to the door. I will walk you back. That is not necessary. Miss Walsh, he said firmly, a woman was just attacked by a coyote in my yard. I am walking you back. There was no point arguing with that tone. Sienna nodded and stepped out into the night. Grayson grabbed a lantern and his rifle, then fell into step beside her. The boarding house was only a few minutes' walk away, but Sienna found herself wishing it were farther. They reached the back door of the boarding house too soon. Sienna turned to face him, suddenly shy. Thank you for the coffee, Mr. Cross. Grayson, he corrected, and thank you again for the chickens, and for noticing. His voice dropped on those last words, and Sienna heard the weight of loneliness in them. You are welcome, she said softly. Then, before she could lose her courage, she added, if you ever forget again, I would be happy to help. I mean, I pass by here often, and it would be no trouble to check on them. Something lit in Grayson's eyes. I would appreciate that, though I will try not to forget. See that you do not, Sienna said with a smile. Those hens need their routine. He smiled back, a real smile this time that transformed his entire face. Good night, Miss Walsh. Sienna, she said. If I am checking your chickens, you should call me Sienna. Good night, Sienna. She slipped inside the boarding house, her heart racing for reasons that had nothing to do with coyotes or midnight adventures. Through the window, she watched Grayson walk back toward his ranch, the lantern swinging in his hand, and felt a warmth in her chest that had nothing to do with the coffee. The next morning, Sienna woke to Mrs. Henderson pounding on her door. Up with you, girl. Those miners want their breakfast and it will not cook itself. Sienna dragged herself out of bed, exhausted from her late-night excursion but unable to stop thinking about dark eyes and calloused hands, and the way Grayson had looked at her in the lamplight. She dressed quickly and hurried down to the kitchen, where Mrs. Henderson was already pulling out pans. You look tired, the older woman observed sharply. Were you up late? Could not sleep, Sienna said, which was not entirely a lie. I kept hearing noises outside. Mrs. Henderson nodded knowingly. That coyote has been prowling around. I heard a shot last night. Must have been someone finally taking aim at it. About time, too. The thing has been terrorizing the neighborhood chickens for weeks. Sienna focused on cracking eggs, hiding her smile. Let Mrs. Henderson think it was someone else who had fired that shot. The morning passed in a blur of cooking and serving and cleaning. The miners came down in shifts, wolfing down their food and heading off to work. Sienna was elbow-deep in dishwater when she heard Mrs. Henderson call from the front room. Sienna, you have a visitor. Her heart skipped a beat. She dried her hands on her apron and went to the front room, where Grayson stood hat in hand, looking uncomfortable in the feminine space of the boarding house parlor. Mr. Cross, Mrs. Henderson said with interest. What brings you by? I came to thank Miss Walsh, Grayson said, his eyes finding Sienna's. She helped me with a matter last night and I wanted to show my appreciation properly. He held out a basket covered with a cloth. "Some eggs from my chickens. They are laying well thanks to her, Mrs. Henderson's eyebrows rose nearly to her hairline. "Is that so? Sienna, you did not mention you had been over to the Cross Ranch." "It was late," Sienna said, taking the basket with hands that trembled slightly. "I noticed his chickens had not been fed, and I knew he had been out working all day, so I took care of it. It was nothing, really." "It was not nothing," Grayson said firmly. "It was kind and thoughtful, and I am grateful." He paused. "I also wanted to ask if Miss Walsh might be available to help me with something else. I have been trying to organize my mother's things, and I find I am at a loss. She had recipes and household systems, and I am making a mess of it all. If Miss Walsh could spare a few hours to give me some guidance, I would pay her for her time." It was a transparent excuse, and they all knew it, but Mrs. Henderson looked pleased rather than suspicious. "I suppose I could spare her for a few hours on Sunday afternoon. The boarders are usually out then anyway. Would that suit?" "That would suit perfectly," Grayson said, a smile tugging at his lips. "Sunday at 2, I will be there," Sienna said, her heart soaring. After Grayson left, Mrs. Henderson gave Sienna a long look. "That is a good man," she said finally. "Hard-working, honest, been taking care of that ranch since he was barely more than a boy. Lost his mother recently, poor thing. He could use someone to look after him." Sienna felt her cheeks heat. "He just needs help organizing." "Of course, Mrs. Henderson said with a knowing smile. "Just organizing. Now get back to those dishes before they grow legs and walk away." The days until Sunday crawled by with agonizing slowness. Sienna found herself watching out the window every time she heard hoofbeats, hoping to catch a glimpse of Grayson riding by. Twice she did, and both times he raised his hand in a wave that made her pulse race. On Saturday evening, she washed her hair with the good soap she had been saving and laid out her best dress, a simple blue cotton that brought out her eyes. She barely slept that night, tossing and turning with anticipation. Sunday dawned clear and warm. Sienna helped serve breakfast and do the morning chores, then changed into her good dress and pinned up her hair with extra care. Mrs. Henderson watched her preparations with an indulgent expression. "You look lovely, dear. Mind you are back before dark." Appearances matter, even in a frontier town like Helena. Yes, Mrs. Henderson. The walk to Grayson's ranch felt longer than it ever had before. Sienna's stomach was full of butterflies, her mind spinning with possibilities and fears. What if she had imagined the connection between them? What if he really did just want help organizing his mother's things and nothing more? But when Grayson opened the door and his face lit up at the sight of her, all her fears melted away. "You came," he said, as if he had doubted she would. "Of course," Sienna said. "I said I would." He stepped back to let her in. The house was tidy enough, she saw, but there was a feminine touch missing that spoke of the absence of a woman's hand. Grayson led her through to what had clearly been his mother's room. Boxes were stacked in the corners, clothes laid out on the bed, papers and books and household items scattered everywhere. "I started trying to sort through it," he said, rubbing the back of his neck. "But everything just reminded me of her, and I kept getting distracted by memories. I thought maybe if someone else was here, someone who did not know her, it would be easier." Sienna understood immediately. She had gone through the same thing with her father's belongings. "Why do you not tell me about her?" she suggested gently. "As we work. Tell me who she was, what she liked, what these things meant to her. It might help." Grayson looked at her with such gratitude that she felt her heart squeeze. "I would like that." They spent the afternoon sorting through a life carefully lived. Grayson told her about his mother, Sarah Cross, who had come west with his father in 1854, endured hardships that would have broken a lesser woman. raised a son alone after being widowed, and never once complained about her lot. Sienna listened and sorted and folded, creating piles for keeping and piles for donating to the church, and piles for passing on to other family members. "She would have liked you," Grayson said at one point, holding up a cookbook with notes scribbled in the margins. "She always said the measure of a person was in the small kindnesses they showed when no one was watching. You feeding those chickens, that was exactly the kind of thing she would have done." "She sounds wonderful," Sienna said sincerely. She was. Grayson set down the cookbook carefully. "After my father died, she had offers to remarry. She was still young enough, still pretty. But she said she had her son and her ranch and her chickens, and that was enough. She never wanted to depend on anyone else again." "I understand that," Sienna said quietly. "After my father died, I felt the same way. Better to be alone than to risk loving someone and losing them again." Grayson moved closer, his eyes intense on her face. "And do you still feel that way?" Sienna's breath caught. They were standing very close now, close enough that she could see the flecks of gold in his dark eyes, smell the scent of horses and leather and soap that clung to him. "I am not sure," she whispered. "I think perhaps I am starting to change my mind." He reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. His fingers lingered on her cheek, warm and rough and gentle. "Sienna," he said, her name a question and a prayer all at once. "Yes," she breathed, though she was not even sure what she was agreeing to. Grayson bent his head and kissed her, soft and sweet and achingly tender. Sienna's eyes fluttered closed as she leaned into him, her hands coming up to rest on his chest. She could feel his heart hammering beneath her palms, as wild as her own. When they broke apart, both breathing hard, Grayson rested his forehead against hers. "I have been thinking about doing that since I saw you standing in my chicken yard with my mother's revolver in your hand," he admitted. Sienna laughed, giddy and breathless. "That is a very strange first impression to have of someone." "Maybe," Grayson agreed. "But it was you, brave and kind and completely unexpected. I think I started falling for you in that moment." "I started falling for you when you offered me coffee instead of yelling at me for trespassing," Sienna confessed. He kissed her again, deeper this time, and Sienna felt like she was flying. When they finally broke apart, the afternoon sun was slanting low through the windows. "I should get back," Sienna said reluctantly. "Mrs. Henderson will worry." "I know." Grayson caught her hand, lacing their fingers together. "But will you come back, next Sunday, and maybe the Sunday after that?" "Yes," Sienna said, unable to stop smiling. "Yes to all the Sundays. And maybe some weekday evenings, too. If you are not too tired from work." "I am never too tired for you," Sienna promised. Grayson walked her back to the boarding house, their hands linked the whole way. At the back door, he kissed her once more, a lingering promise of more to come. "Good night, Sienna Walsh." "Good night, Grayson Cross." She floated into the boarding house, her lips still tingling, her heart full to bursting. Mrs. Henderson took one look at her face and smiled. "I see the organizing went well." "Very well," Sienna agreed, too happy to be embarrassed. Over the following weeks, Sienna and Grayson fell into a pattern. She would finish her work at the boarding house and walk over to his ranch, where they would share supper and talk for hours. Grayson taught her about ranching, showing her how to work the cattle and mend fences and break horses. Sienna taught him her father's recipes, filling his sparse kitchen with the smells of proper cooking. On Sundays, they would ride out into the Montana countryside, Grayson showing her the beauty of the land he loved. They would picnic by streams and climb hills to watch the sunset and kiss until they were both breathless and aching. "I want to marry you," Grayson said one evening in late August as they sat on his porch watching the stars come out. I know we have only known each other 2 months, but I have never been more certain of anything in my life. I want you here with me properly. I want to build that dream you told me about, the farm and the family. I can give you that, Sienna, if you will have me." Sienna turned to look at him, her heart in her throat. "Yes," she said simply. "Yes, I will marry you, Grayson Cross." He pulled her into his arms and kissed her deeply, and Sienna felt like she had finally come home. They were married 3 weeks later in the small church in Helena. Mrs. Henderson cried and fussed over Sienna like a mother hen, helping her into a simple white dress that had been altered from one of the donations at the church. Grayson wore his best suit, looking handsome and nervous as he waited at the altar. The ceremony was simple but heartfelt. When the preacher pronounced them man and wife, Grayson kissed her with such joy and love that Sienna felt tears stream down her cheeks. "I love you," he whispered against her lips. "I will love you until the day I die and beyond." "I love you too," Sienna whispered back. "Thank you for noticing me. Thank you for letting me notice you." They held a small reception at the boarding house, where the miners and Mrs. Henderson and a handful of Grayson's ranching neighbors toasted to their happiness. Then Grayson lifted Sienna onto his horse and they rode back to the ranch together, her arms wrapped tight around his waist. The first night in their marriage bed was tender and sweet and full of discovery. Grayson was patient and gentle, taking his time to learn what made Sienna gasp and shiver. When they finally came together, it was with a sense of rightness that made Sienna's eyes fill with tears. "Are you all right?" Grayson asked, concerned, brushing the tears from her cheeks. "I am perfect," Sienna assured him. "I am just so happy. I did not think I could ever be this happy again after losing my father." "I felt the same way after losing my mother," Grayson said, kissing her forehead. "But then you walked into my life with your ridiculous concern for my chickens and everything changed." Sienna laughed and pulled him down for another kiss. They made love again, slower this time, savoring each touch and kiss. Afterward they lay tangled together, Sienna's head on Grayson's chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. "Tell me about your dreams," she said sleepily. "The ones you had before I came." Grayson stroked her hair, his touch soothing. "I dreamed of making this ranch something special. My father started it, but he died before he could really build it up. I wanted to finish what he started, prove I could make something lasting. But it felt hollow doing it alone. Now with you here, it feels like it actually means something." "We will build it together," Sienna promised. "A real home, a real life. Everything we both wanted, and they did." Over the next months and years, Sienna and Grayson transformed the ranch into everything they had dreamed. They expanded the chicken coop and added ducks and geese. They planted a large garden that produced enough vegetables to sell in town. Grayson brought in more cattle, and Sienna helped him during the spring calving season, working side by side in the cold Montana nights to save struggling calves. It was hard work, backbreaking at times, but Sienna had never been happier. Every morning she woke in Grayson's arms. Every evening they sat together on the porch, planning and dreaming and laughing. The loneliness that had haunted them both slowly faded, replaced by a deep contentment. In the spring of 1883, Sienna realized she was pregnant. She told Grayson over breakfast, watching his face transform from confusion to understanding to absolute joy in the space of a heartbeat. "A baby," he breathed, reaching across the table to take her hands. "We are going to have a baby." "Yes," Sienna said, laughing and crying at the same time. In the fall, the doctor thinks. Grayson came around the table and lifted her into his arms, spinning her around until she was dizzy and laughing. "I am going to be a father," he said wonderingly. "We are going to be parents." "We are," Sienna agreed, cupping his face in her hands. "Our baby. Our family." He kissed her with such tenderness that she felt her heart might burst. "I love you so much," he said against her lips. "Thank you for this. Thank you for everything." The pregnancy was not easy. Sienna suffered from terrible morning sickness for the first few months, and Grayson would hold her hair back while she retched, then carry her back to bed and bring her dry toast and weak tea. As her belly grew, the work became harder, but Grayson took on more of the heavy tasks and hired a young man from town to help with the ranch work so Sienna could rest more. In October of 1883, Sienna went into labor. It was long and difficult, lasting through the night and into the next day. Grayson stayed by her side the entire time, holding her hand and wiping her brow and telling her how strong she was, how brave, how much he loved her. Finally, as the sun set on the second day, their son was born. He came into the world screaming lustily, his face red and scrunched and absolutely perfect. The doctor placed him in Sienna's arms, and she looked down at his tiny face and felt love slam into her like a physical force. "Hello, little one," she whispered. "We have been waiting for you." Grayson sat on the edge of the bed, his arm around Sienna, staring at their son with wonder. "He is perfect," he said, his voice choked with emotion. "Sienna, he is perfect." "He is," she agreed, leaning her head on his shoulder. "What should we name him?" They had discussed names throughout the pregnancy, but nothing had felt quite right until now. Grayson looked at his son, then at his wife, and said, "Thomas, after your father, so a part of him lives on." Sienna burst into tears, overwhelmed by love and gratitude and the rightness of it all. "Thomas Cross," she said through her tears. "Yes, that is perfect." Little Thomas was a good baby, healthy and strong. He had Sienna's blue eyes and Grayson's dark hair, and both parents were utterly besotted with him. Grayson would come in from the fields and scoop up his son, talking to him about the ranch and the cattle and the dreams he had for him. Sienna would watch them together, her heart full to overflowing. The first year of Thomas's life passed in a blur of sleepless nights and precious moments. Grayson proved to be a devoted father, changing diapers and walking the floor with a fussy baby so Sienna could rest. They moved the cradle into their bedroom so they could both tend to Thomas during the night, working together as they did in everything. As Thomas grew, he became more active and curious. He learned to crawl, then to walk, tottering around the ranch house on unsteady legs while his parents followed anxiously behind. His first word was "Papa," which made Grayson tear up with pride. His second was "Mama," which made Sienna gather him into her arms and cover his face with kisses. In the summer of 1885, Sienna discovered she was pregnant again. Thomas was just shy of 2 years old, toddling around and getting into everything with the fearless curiosity of his age. Grayson was overjoyed at the news of another baby, though he worried about Sienna after the difficulty of her first labor. "I will be fine," Sienna assured him. "Women have been having babies since the beginning of time, and I have you to take care of me." "Always," Grayson promised, his hand spread protectively over her still flat belly. "I will always take care of you both." This pregnancy was easier than the first. Sienna still had morning sickness, but it passed more quickly, and she felt stronger overall. She continued to work alongside Grayson on the ranch, though he insisted she avoid the heaviest tasks. Thomas, too young to understand what was happening, would pat his mother's growing belly and babble nonsensically, making his parents laugh. In February of 1886, on a cold Montana night with snow falling softly outside, Sienna went into labor with their second child. This birth was faster than the first, and as dawn broke over the snow-covered ranch, a daughter entered the world with a lusty cry. "A girl," the doctor said, placing the baby in Sienna's arms. "A healthy baby girl." Sienna looked down at her daughter, taking in the tiny features, the perfect rosebud mouth, the wisps of dark hair. "She looks like your mother," she said to Grayson, who was staring at his daughter with awe. "Sarah," he said immediately. "Can we name her Sarah?" "After my mother, Sarah Cross," Sienna said, testing the name. "Yes, I think that is beautiful." Little Sarah was more demanding than Thomas had been as a baby, fussing more and sleeping less. But she was also affectionate, cuddling close to whoever held her and cooing happily when her father sang to her in his deep, rumbling voice. Thomas, now 2.5, was fascinated by his baby sister. He would bring her his toys and pat her head gently, saying "baby" with great importance. Grayson and Sienna watched their children together and marveled at how much their lives had changed. "You remember that night I found you feeding the chickens?" Grayson asked one evening as they sat on the porch, watching Thomas play in the yard while Sarah napped inside. "How could I forget?" Sienna said, leaning against his shoulder. "I thought you would be angry with me for trespassing." "I was too stunned to be angry," Grayson said with a laugh. "I came outside to find a beautiful woman in my chicken yard holding a revolver, telling me I had forgotten to feed my hens. It was like something out of a dream." "A very strange dream," Sienna teased. "The best dream," Grayson corrected, turning to kiss her. "You saved more than my chickens that night, Sienna. You saved me." "I was drowning in loneliness and grief, and I did not even realize it until you showed up and reminded me what it felt like to be cared for." "You saved me too," Sienna said softly. "I thought my life was over after my father died. I thought I would just work at the boarding house until I was old and alone. But then I met you, and suddenly I had everything I had ever dreamed of and more." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the sun set over the Montana landscape they both loved. Thomas chased a butterfly through the garden, his laughter carrying on the evening breeze. "I want more," Grayson said suddenly. Sienna raised an eyebrow. "More children. Grayson Cross, Sarah is only 4 months old," he laughed. "Well, yes, more children eventually if you are willing. But I meant more land. The property next to ours is coming up for sale. Old man Jenkins is moving back east to live with his daughter. If we could buy his land, we could double the size of the ranch, run more cattle, maybe start breeding horses seriously." "That is a big undertaking," Sienna said thoughtfully. "Do we have the money?" "Almost," Grayson said. "Another year of good cattle prices and we should have enough for a down payment. We would have to take a loan for the rest, but I think we could manage it." Sienna considered this. It was a risk, but they had proven they could work hard and build something lasting. "Then let us do it," she said. "Let us build something really special for our children." Grayson pulled her close and kissed her thoroughly. "Have I told you today that I love you?" "Not since this morning," Sienna said with a smile. "Then I have been remiss. I love you, Sienna Cross. You are the best thing that ever happened to me." "I love you too," Sienna said, kissing him back. "My chicken forgetting Cowboy," he groaned. "Are you ever going to let me live that down?" "Never," Sienna said cheerfully. "It is our origin story, how we met because you were too tired to remember the chickens and I was too nosy to mind my own business. I am grateful for your nosiness every single day," Grayson said seriously. Over the next year, they saved every penny they could. Sienna sold eggs and vegetables in town, building up a reputation for quality produce. Grayson took on extra work breaking horses for neighbors, his skill with difficult animals becoming well known in the area. They lived frugally, spending money only on necessities and putting everything else aside for the land purchase. In the spring of 1887, they made their offer on the Jenkins property, and it was accepted. The signing took place in the bank in Helena, with Sienna and Grayson sitting side by side as they put their names to the loan documents. It was terrifying and exhilarating all at once. "We just doubled our land," Grayson said as they rode home, the deed to the new property safely tucked in his jacket. "We are now the owners of one of the larger ranches in the area. And we are in debt up to our eyeballs," Sienna said, but she was smiling. "No more new dresses for me for a few years." "You do not need new dresses," Grayson said, reaching over to squeeze her hand. "You are beautiful in whatever you wear." They worked harder than ever over the next few years, expanding their operation and paying down the loan. Thomas grew into a sturdy boy who loved helping his father with the animals. Sarah became a bright, talkative child who followed her mother everywhere, learning to cook and garden and care for the chickens. In 1888, Sienna had another daughter, whom they named Margaret after Grayson's grandmother. 2 years later, in 1890, she gave birth to twin boys, whom they named James and John. The ranch house, which had once seemed so empty to Grayson, was now bursting with life and noise and love. The years brought challenges as well as joys. There were hard winters when they lost cattle to the cold. There were dry summers when the crops struggled. There were illnesses and injuries and setbacks. But through it all, Sienna and Grayson faced everything together, their love deepening with each passing year. On their 10th wedding anniversary in September of 1893, Grayson surprised Sienna by taking her back to the spot where they had first kissed, in what had been his mother's room but was now a proper parlor. 10 years, he said, taking her hands in his. 10 years since you became my wife. 10 years of happiness I never thought I would have. We have built a good life, Sienna said, looking around at the home they had created together. The walls were decorated with children's drawings. The furniture showed the wear of daily family life. It was not fancy, but it was full of love. "We have," Grayson agreed. "And I want to build more. I want to grow old with you, Sienna. I want to see our children grow up and have children of their own. I want to sit on the porch when we are ancient and gray and remember the night you fed my chickens." Sienna laughed, tears of happiness streaming down her face. "I want that too, all of it. Every moment with you." He kissed her then, as sweet and tender as their first kiss had been all those years ago. From the next room came the sound of their children playing, Thomas trying to corral his younger siblings with varying degrees of success. "We should probably rescue Thomas," Sienna said reluctantly. "In a minute," Grayson said, pulling her close. "Just give me one more minute alone with my wife." They stood there wrapped in each other's arms, surrounded by the life they had built from a chance midnight encounter and a forgotten bucket of chicken feed. Outside, the Montana sun set in a blaze of orange and gold. The chickens, descendants of the ones Sienna had saved that first night, settled into their coop for the evening. And in the ranch house that had once been so empty, love and laughter filled every room. The years continued to roll by, each one bringing new challenges and new joys. The ranch prospered, becoming one of the most successful in the Helena area. Grayson's reputation as a fair dealer and skilled rancher grew, and people came from neighboring counties to buy his cattle and horses. Sienna's vegetable garden expanded until she was supplying several families in town, and her preserves won prizes at the county fair. Thomas grew into a serious young man who loved ranching as much as his father did. He would ride out with Grayson before dawn, the two of them working side by side in comfortable silence. Sarah inherited her grandmother's spirit and independence, helping her mother with the younger children, but always dreaming of adventures beyond the ranch. Margaret was gentle and artistic, filling sketchbooks with drawings of the ranch and the animals. The twins, James and John, were inseparable troublemakers who kept everyone on their toes. In 1895, when Sienna was 34 and Grayson was 39, they welcomed their sixth and final child, a daughter they named Grace. She was a surprise baby, arriving when they thought their family was complete, but she was loved no less for being unexpected. 6 children, Grayson said wonderingly, holding tiny Grace in his arms while Sienna rested after the birth. "We have 6 children, Sienna." "We do," she agreed, tired but happy. "A full house and a full heart." "I never imagined this," Grayson said, his voice thick with emotion. "When I was alone after my mother died, I never imagined I could have all of this. A wife I love more than life itself. Children who fill this house with joy. A ranch that is thriving. It is more than I ever dreamed possible." "It is more than either of us dreamed," Sienna said, reaching out to touch his hand. "But we built it together. That is what makes it special." As the children grew older, the ranch began to shift from being just Grayson and Sienna's operation to being a true family business. Thomas, at 16, was already taking on significant responsibilities. Sarah, at 14, kept the books with a mathematical precision that impressed even the banker in town. Margaret, at 12, had started a small business selling her drawings and paintings to tourists passing through Helena on their way west. The twins, at 10, were responsible for the chickens and smaller livestock, a job they took surprisingly seriously despite their generally mischievous nature. One evening in the summer of 1898, the family gathered on the expanded porch for supper, a nightly ritual they all cherished. The older children helped bring out the food while Grayson carved the roast, and Sienna settled 3-year-old Grace in her chair. "Papa," Thomas said during the meal, "I have been thinking about the northern pasture. If we expanded the irrigation system we put in last year, we could probably increase our hay yield by 1/3. That would mean we could support more cattle through the winter." Grayson nodded thoughtfully. "That is good thinking, son. We would need to invest in more pipe, but it would pay off in the long run." "I already did the calculations," Sarah chimed in, pulling a small notebook from her pocket. "If we order the supplies from Denver, instead of having them freighted through Helena, we would save enough to make the project feasible this year instead of waiting until next." Sienna and Grayson exchanged proud looks across the table. Their children were not just helping with the ranch, they were thinking about its future and contributing ideas. "What do you think, Mama?" Thomas asked. "You always see things we miss." "I think you two have become very smart about ranching," Sienna said warmly. "And I think your father and I are very lucky to have such capable children." After supper, while the children cleaned up, Sienna and Grayson took their customary walk around the property. It was something they tried to do every evening, a chance to be alone together and talk about the day. They walked hand in hand toward the chicken coop, as they often did, the circle closing back to where their love story had begun. "Do you ever regret it?" Grayson asked suddenly. "Giving up your job at the boarding house, the independence you had there?" Sienna stopped and turned to face him, surprised. "Regret it? Grayson, how could I regret any of this? This is everything I wanted, everything we wanted." "I know," Grayson said, but there was something uncertain in his eyes. "But you work so hard. 6 children, the garden, the house, helping with the ranch. Sometimes I worry that you gave up too much to be here with me." "Look at me," Sienna said, cupping his face in her hands. "I gave up nothing. I gained everything. Do you remember what I told you that first night about my dream of having a farm and a family? This is that dream, Grayson. This is everything I wanted and more. Yes, I work hard, but I work hard for something I love, alongside a man I love, raising children I love. There is no regret in that. Not one single moment of it." Grayson pulled her close, burying his face in her hair. "I love you so much," he said, his voice muffled. "Sometimes I still cannot believe you chose me, that you saw something worth loving in a lonely cowboy who forgot to feed his chickens." "I saw everything worth loving," Sienna said firmly. "Your kindness, your strength, your gentle heart. I saw the man you were and the man you would become. And I have never, not for one second, regretted choosing you." They stood there in the gathering twilight, holding each other as they had done countless times over the past 15 years. From the house came the sound of children laughing and arguing and living. The chickens clucked softly in their coop, the descendants of those birds that had brought Sienna and Grayson together. "You remember what you said to me that night?" Grayson asked. "When I found you with the chickens." "I said a lot of things," Sienna said with a laugh. "I was babbling nervously." "You said your father always told you chickens need their evening feed or they stop laying proper," Grayson recalled. "You were so earnest about it. So concerned about these chickens you had never met, belonging to a man you did not know." "I could not stand the thought of them going hungry," Sienna said. "It seemed cruel when it could be so easily prevented." "That is who you are," Grayson said softly. "Someone who sees a need and fills it without thought for herself. You fed my chickens that night, but you have been feeding my soul every day since. You took a lonely, grieving man and gave him a reason to live again, a reason to dream again. You did the same for me," Sienna whispered. "I was lost after my father died. I felt like my life was over before it had really begun. But then you offered me coffee and looked at me like I was something precious, and suddenly I had hope again." They walked slowly back to the house, their arms around each other. On the porch, Thomas was teaching the twins a card game while Sarah read to Margaret and Grace. It was a scene of such domestic contentment that Sienna felt her heart swell with gratitude. "We made this," she said quietly to Grayson. "All of this, from one midnight meeting and 2 lonely hearts." "Best thing I never did was forget those chickens," Grayson said with a grin. Sienna laughed and swatted his arm. "Do not go forgetting them now. We have gotten rather attached to fresh eggs." "Never," Grayson promised. "Though I admit if I did forget I would hope you would come feed them again." "I would like to relive that night." "We can relive it any time," Sienna said, going up on her toes to kiss him, "though preferably without the coyote." The children groaned good-naturedly at their parents' display of affection, but they were smiling. Thomas caught Sienna's eye and grinned. "Are you two going to be mushy all evening? Because if so, we might go inside." "We are allowed to be mushy," Grayson said, pulling Sienna down to sit on his lap in the rocking chair. "We are in love. You will understand when you are older." "I am 16, Thomas protested. "I am practically grown." "Practically is the key word," Sienna said with a smile. "You have plenty of time to fall in love. Do not rush it." "Did you and Papa rush it?" Sarah asked curiously. "You got married pretty fast, did you not?" "We knew what we wanted," Grayson said simply. "When you find the right person, sometimes you just know." "How do you know?" Margaret asked, always the romantic. "How did you know Mama was the right person?" Grayson looked down at Sienna, his eyes soft. "Because being with her felt like coming home." "Because she saw me, really saw me, and did not look away. Because she made me want to be better, do better, dream bigger, and because I could not imagine a single day of my future without her in it." "That is beautiful, Papa," Margaret sighed. "It is the truth," Grayson said. "Your mother is the best thing that ever happened to me." "What about us?" James asked with mock indignation. "You lot are the second best thing," Grayson said, reaching out to ruffle his hair. "But you would not be here without your mother, so she still wins." The children groaned, but they were laughing. As the stars came out overhead, the family sat together on the porch, talking and joking and simply being together. It was a moment of perfect contentment, the kind that Sienna tried to hold in her memory to carry her through harder times. Later that night, after the children were all in bed, Sienna and Grayson lay together in their room, the window open to let in the cool night breeze. "Grayson," Sienna said into the darkness, Thank you for building this life with me. Thank you for every day, every moment, every memory." He rolled to face her, his hand finding hers under the covers. "Thank you for noticing me. Thank you for caring enough to feed those silly chickens. Thank you for saying yes when I asked you to marry me. Thank you for every single thing that led us to right now." They fell asleep wrapped in each other's arms, as they had done every night for 15 years, and would do for many more to come. The years continued their steady march. Thomas turned 18 and began courting a girl from town, much to Sienna's delight and Grayson's protective concern. Sarah announced her intention to become a teacher, a profession that suited her logical mind and patient nature. The younger children grew and changed, each developing their own personalities and dreams. In 1901, on a warm September evening, Sienna and Grayson celebrated their 18th wedding anniversary. The children had conspired to give them a rare evening alone, Thomas taking his siblings into town for a social at the church. 18 years, Sienna said, sitting on the porch swing beside her husband. "We have been married 18 years. Sometimes it feels like yesterday, and sometimes it feels like forever." "Forever in a good way," Grayson clarified. "Forever in the best way," Sienna agreed. "I cannot remember what my life was like before you. It feels like I have always been here, always been yours." "You have always been mine," Grayson said, pulling her close. "From the moment you walked into my chicken yard with that determined look on your face. My heart knew you before my head caught up." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the sun set over the land they had worked so hard to build. The ranch was thriving now, well established and profitable. Their children were healthy and happy. It was more than either of them had dared to dream of in those early, lonely days. "You ever think about that night?" Sienna asked. "Really think about what would have happened if I had not noticed the chickens needed feeding, if I had just minded my own business and stayed at the boarding house?" "All the time," Grayson admitted. "And it terrifies me. What if you had not noticed? What if I had woken up the next morning and fed them myself and we had never met? What if you had decided it was none of your concern? I would have gone on living, I suppose, but it would not have been life." "Not really. It would have been existing." "I would have eventually left the boarding house," Sienna said thoughtfully. "Maybe found work somewhere else or married someone convenient for security. I would have survived, but I would not have lived either, not like this, not with this kind of joy." "We were both half alive before we found each other," Grayson said. "Two broken pieces that somehow fit together perfectly." "Not broken," Sienna corrected gently. "Wounded, maybe, grieving, but not broken. We were whole people who became more when we found each other. That is different." Grayson considered this. "You are right. As usual, we did not need each other to be complete, but we chose each other anyway, and that made us stronger." "Exactly," Sienna said, kissing his cheek. "We were whole separately but better together." "Much better," Grayson agreed, capturing her lips in a proper kiss. When the children returned later that evening, they found their parents still on the porch, wrapped in each other's arms and talking quietly. Thomas herded his siblings inside to give them privacy, but not before Sarah caught Sienna's eye and smiled. "We are so lucky," Sarah said to her brother as they got the younger children ready for bed, "to have parents who still love each other like that. Some of my friends at school, their parents barely tolerate each other, but Mama and Papa, they are still in love." "They are disgusting," John said, but he was grinning. "Always kissing and holding hands." "I think it is nice," Margaret said dreamily. When I get married, I want it to be like that. I want to still be in love when I am old." "You are 12, James pointed out. "You are not getting married anytime soon." "I know that," Margaret said with dignity, "but I can still dream about it." Thomas smiled at his siblings' chatter. He hoped he would be as lucky as his parents when he married. The love between Sienna and Grayson was the foundation of their family, the rock upon which everything else was built. It gave him and his siblings a sense of security that he knew not all children had. Outside, Grayson and Sienna continued their anniversary evening, talking about their past, their present, and their future. They discussed Thomas's courtship and Sarah's educational plans. They talked about expanding the horse breeding program and building a new barn. They reminisced about early days of their marriage, laughing over mistakes and misunderstandings that had seemed so important at the time but were funny now. "Remember when you tried to cook that first roast after we were married?" Grayson said, chuckling. "And you got the temperature wrong and it came out like leather." "I was so mortified," Sienna groaned. "I cried because I thought you would think I was a terrible wife." "I thought you were perfect," Grayson said. "I would have eaten leather for every meal if it meant keeping you." "Thankfully, I learned to cook properly," Sienna said. "Though you never complained, even when things were awful." "Because I was just happy to have you there," Grayson said simply. "Food was secondary to your presence." As the night grew later, they finally went inside to bed. They passed the children's rooms, checking on each one as they always did. Thomas was already asleep, sprawled across his bed in the careless way of young men. Sarah had fallen asleep with a book on her chest. Margaret's walls were covered with her drawings. The twins were tangled together in their shared bed, as inseparable in sleep as in waking. Little Grace was curled up with her rag doll, thumb in her mouth. "We made good ones," Grayson whispered as they stood in Grace's doorway. "We did," Sienna agreed softly. "Strong, kind, smart. They will do well in this world." In their own room, they prepared for bed in the comfortable routine of long marriage. Sienna brushed out her hair while Grayson checked the windows. They met in the middle of the bed, gravitating toward each other as naturally as breathing. "I love you," Grayson said, as he did every night. "I love you," Sienna replied, as she did every night. They fell asleep holding hands, dreaming of chickens and midnight meetings and all the ways love could transform a life. The years flowed on like a river, bringing both joy and sorrow. In 1903, Thomas married his sweetheart, a kind young woman named Emily who fit seamlessly into the family. They built a house on the far end of the ranch property, and Thomas took on more and more responsibility for running the operation, easing Grayson's workload as he entered his late 40s. In 1905, Sarah left for college in Denver to get her teaching certificate, the first member of the family to pursue higher education. Sienna cried as they put her on the train, but they were tears of pride as much as sadness. In 1907, Margaret married a traveling artist who had come through Helena and been captivated by both her work and her spirit. They moved to San Francisco, where Margaret opened a small gallery. It was hard for Sienna to see her daughter move so far away, but she was happy that Margaret was following her dreams. The twins graduated from school and decided to start their own ranch on land they purchased with money saved from years of working. They stayed close by, so Sienna and Grayson saw them often, but the house grew quieter with each child who left. Only Grace remained at home, and she showed every sign of being content to stay. She loved the ranch and had a gift with animals that surpassed even her father's. By the time she was 15, she was training horses that other ranchers sent from miles around. "We are getting old," Grayson said one evening in 1910, watching Grace work with a particularly difficult mare. He was 54 now, his hair more gray than black, his body showing the wear of decades of hard work. "Speak for yourself," Sienna said, though at 49 she felt the years in her joints and the lines on her face. "I prefer to think of us as well seasoned." "Seasoned like old leather," Grayson said with a laugh, but then he grew serious. "Sienna, I have been thinking. Thomas is running the ranch now, doing a better job of it than I ever did. The other children are launched and doing well. Grace will be fine whatever she decides to do. Maybe it is time for us to step back a little. Enjoy what we have built instead of always working so hard." "What did you have in mind?" Sienna asked, intrigued. "I want to take you traveling," Grayson said. "We have never gone anywhere beyond Montana and Wyoming. I want to show you the ocean. Take you to San Francisco to visit Margaret. Maybe go east and see where you grew up. We have the money now and Thomas can handle the ranch. What do you say?" Sienna felt a thrill of excitement. "I say yes. Let us have an adventure." They spent the winter of 1910-1911 planning their trip. In the spring of 1911, they boarded a train in Helena with 2 suitcases and open hearts. It was the first time either of them had been on a train, and they held hands like children as the Montana landscape rolled past the windows. They spent 2 weeks in San Francisco with Margaret and her husband, marveling at the size of the city and the sight of the Pacific Ocean. Sienna stood on the beach and cried at the beauty of it, and Grayson wrapped his arms around her from behind and held her as the waves crashed at their feet. From there, they went south to see the desert, then east through Colorado and Kansas. They stopped in Ohio, where Sienna showed Grayson the farm where she had grown up. It was owned by someone else now, the house different from her memories, but standing there with Grayson's hand in hers, she felt a sense of peace. This was where she had started, but it was not where she belonged anymore. Home was Montana. Home was the ranch. Home was wherever Grayson was. They returned to Helena in the fall of 1911, sunburned and tired and happier than they had been in years. The break from routine had revitalized them both, reminding them that there was more to life than work and responsibility. "We should do that more often," Sienna said as they rode the final stretch back to the ranch. "Take time to see the world and remember we are more than just ranchers and parents." "Agreed," Grayson said. "Though I will admit I miss the ranch, miss the chickens and the cattle and the mountains." "I miss them too," Sienna admitted. "But I am glad we went. It reminded me why we built this life, so we could have moments like these." Thomas and Emily had kept everything running smoothly in their absence, and it was clear they had things well in hand. Grayson officially turned over the day-to-day management of the ranch to his son, though he still helped with major decisions and heavy work when needed. As they settled back into ranch life, Sienna and Grayson found a new rhythm. They still worked, but not with the desperate intensity of earlier years. They took time for each other, for quiet mornings and long talks and lazy afternoons. They babysat their first grandchild, Thomas and Emily's son Samuel, and marveled at the circle of life that had brought them from that midnight meeting to being grandparents. In 1913, Sarah returned to Helena with her teaching certificate and a position at the town school. She boarded with her parents temporarily, filling the house with her energy and her stories about her students. Sienna loved having her daughter home, even if it was temporary. Grace, now 18, announced her intention to never marry, but instead to devote her life to training horses. "I do not need a husband," she declared at dinner one evening. "I have everything I need right here." "You might change your mind," Sienna said gently. "Maybe," Grace admitted. "But right now, I cannot imagine wanting anything more than this ranch and these horses." Grayson caught Sienna's eye across the table and smiled. Their youngest had inherited their love of the land and the life they had built. Whatever she decided in the future, She would be fine. On their 30th wedding anniversary, in September of 1913, Sienna and Grayson stood together in the chicken yard where their story had begun. The coop had been rebuilt twice over the years, expanded and improved, but it occupied the same spot where Sienna had stood with a revolver in her hand 31 years earlier. 30 years, Grayson said, his arm around her waist. 3 decades since you became my wife. Half a lifetime spent together. The best half, Sienna said, leaning into him, though I hope we have another 30 years ahead of us. I will do my best, Grayson promised. Though I make no guarantees, I am 57 now. These bones are getting creaky. Your bones are fine, Sienna said firmly. We both have plenty of good years left. They stood there in the evening light, surrounded by the sounds of the ranch. The chickens clucked softly as they settled for the night. Cattle lowed in the distance. Grace's voice carried from the barn as she sang to the horses she was training. Thank you, Grayson said suddenly. For what? For noticing. For caring enough to feed those chickens all those years ago. For seeing something in me worth loving. For building this life with me. For every single day we have had together. Sienna turned in his arms to face him, her hands coming up to frame his weathered face. Thank you for letting me in. For offering me coffee and a chance, for loving me so well for so long, for giving me everything I ever dreamed of and more. They kissed as the sun set behind them, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink and gold. It was not their first kiss, and it would not be their last, but it held all the tenderness and passion and deep, abiding love of 30 years of marriage. From the house, they heard Sarah call that dinner was ready. Hand in hand, they walked back to the ranch house, their steps slower than they had been 30 years ago, but no less certain. They had built something lasting here, something that would continue long after they were gone. A legacy of love and hard work and family. The dinner table was full that night. Thomas and Emily were there with little Samuel, now a toddling 2-year-old. Sarah had prepared a special meal. Grace regaled them with stories of the horse she was training. It was loud and chaotic and absolutely perfect. After dinner, as Sienna washed dishes and watched through the window as Grayson played with his grandson in the yard, she felt overwhelming gratitude wash over her. She had been so lost after her father died, so certain her life was over before it had really begun. But then she had noticed a cowboy's chickens needed feeding, and that single act of kindness had led to all of this. "What are you thinking about, Mama?" Sarah asked, coming to stand beside her at the sink. "How strange and wonderful life is," Sienna said softly. "How one small moment can change everything, how love can grow in the most unexpected places." "You and Papa," Sarah said with a smile. "You really do love each other as much now as you did when you first married, do you not?" "More," Sienna said honestly. "When we married, we loved each other, but we did not really know each other. Now, after 30 years, after 6 children and 1,000 challenges and 10,000 ordinary days, we know each other completely. And that knowing has only deepened the love. I want that," Sarah said wistfully. "What you and Papa have. That kind of partnership and love." "You will find it," Sienna assured her. "When you stop looking and just live your life, love has a way of finding you, trust me. I know from experience." Sarah hugged her mother, and Sienna held her close, breathing in the scent of her hair and marveling that this grown woman had once been a tiny baby in her arms. That night, after everyone had gone home or to bed, Sienna and Grayson prepared for sleep in their familiar routine. As they lay together in the darkness, Grayson said, "Do you know what I am most proud of?" "What?" Sienna asked. "Not the ranch, though that is something. Not the children, though they are wonderful. I am most proud that, after 30 years, you still choose me." Every day you wake up and choose to love me, choose to be with me. That is what I am most proud of." "Of course I choose you," Sienna said, her voice thick with emotion. "You are the best choice I ever made, the only choice that ever really mattered." They fell asleep wrapped together, two people who had found each other in the darkness and built a lifetime of light together. The years continued to pass, bringing the joys and sorrows that come with age. There were more grandchildren, babies who filled the ranch house with noise and laughter. There were losses too, friends and neighbors who passed on, reminding them that time was precious and not to be wasted. In 1918, Grayson fell ill with a fever that terrified Sienna. For 3 days he burned while she sat by his bedside, wiping his face with cool cloths and praying harder than she had ever prayed. On the 4th day, the fever broke, and when his eyes finally focused on her face, she burst into tears of relief. "I thought I was going to lose you," she said, clutching his hand. "Not yet," Grayson said weakly. "I still have things to do, years left with you." He recovered slowly, and the experience changed them both. They became even more conscious of making each day count, of not taking their time together for granted. In 1920, they celebrated their 37th wedding anniversary. Grayson was 64 now, Sienna 59. They were grandparents many times over, elder statesmen of the Helena ranching community. But when they looked at each other, they still saw the young people they had been that midnight meeting in the chicken yard. "I have been thinking about that night again," Grayson said as they sat on the porch watching the sunset. "The night we met." "You think about it a lot," Sienna teased gently. "Because it was the most important night of my life," Grayson said seriously. "Everything good that has happened since then stems from that moment. You, the children, the grandchildren, this life we built. All of it started because I was too tired to feed my chickens and you were too kind to let them go hungry." "Fate," Sienna said thoughtfully. "Or providence. Or just plain luck. Whatever you want to call it, I am grateful for it." "As am I," Grayson said, taking her hand. "Every single day I am grateful." They sat in comfortable silence, hands linked, watching the day fade into night. The chickens, great-great-great-grandchildren of those original hens, settled into their coop. The ranch expanded and improved beyond what they had imagined, hummed with quiet activity even at this late hour. "We did well," Sienna said softly. "Did we not? We took 2 broken hearts and made something beautiful." "We did better than well," Grayson said. "We built a legacy of love. That is something to be proud of." As the stars came out overhead, Sienna leaned her head on Grayson's shoulder and counted her blessings. A husband who loved her after nearly 4 decades. Children and grandchildren who thrived. A ranch that would continue for generations. A life that had exceeded every dream, and it had all started with chickens. In the years that followed, Sienna and Grayson eased more fully into the role of elders. They gave advice when asked, babysat grandchildren, and watched with pride as their children and Thomas ran the ranch with skill and dedication. They took another trip, this time to visit Sarah, who had moved to take a position at a larger school in Denver. Grace, surprising everyone, fell in love with a young veterinarian who came to the ranch to treat an injured horse. They married in 1922, in a ceremony held right on the ranch where Grace had grown up. Sienna cried through the entire service, not from sadness, but from the overwhelming rightness of seeing her youngest daughter so happy. "That is all of them," Grayson said that night as they prepared for bed after the wedding celebration. "All 6 of our children are settled and happy. We did our job, Sienna." "We did," she agreed, though the house felt emptier with Grace gone, even though she and her husband had built a home just down the road so she could continue training horses. But empty nest did not mean empty life. Sienna and Grayson filled their days with each other and their growing horde of grandchildren and the ranch that was still their first love after family. In 1925, they celebrated their 42nd wedding anniversary. Grayson was 69, Sienna 64. They moved a bit slower now, their bodies showing the wear of hard lives well lived. But their love had not diminished with age. If anything, it had grown stronger, tempered by time and challenge into something unbreakable. 42 years, Grayson marveled as they stood once again in the chicken yard, their traditional anniversary spot. We have been married 42 years. That is longer than many people even live. We have been blessed, Sienna said, with longevity and health and love, so much love. Do you remember what you said to me that first night? Grayson asked. When I found you here. I said a lot of things, Sienna reminded him with a laugh. I was nervous and babbling. You said you noticed I had forgotten to feed the chickens because you had seen me ride by your window, slumped in the saddle with exhaustion, and you remembered what your father said about chickens needing their evening feed. Grayson's voice was soft with memory. You saw me when I was at my lowest, and instead of looking away or judging, you helped. That is who you are, Sienna, someone who sees people who are struggling and reaches out a hand. You reached back, Sienna pointed out. You could have been angry or dismissive. Instead, you invited me in for coffee and saw me too. Really saw me, not just a boarding house worker but a person with dreams and hurts and hopes. We saved each other that night, Grayson said, pulling her close. Two lonely people finding each other in the darkness. They stood there in the yard where their love had begun, surrounded by the evidence of the life they had built. The ranch spread out around them, prosperous and thriving. Lights glowed in the windows of houses that had not existed when they met, homes for their children and grandchildren. The chicken coop, much improved from that first night, held dozens of birds. I would do it all again, Sienna said suddenly. Every challenge, every hardship, every moment of fear or pain. I would do it all again without hesitation if it meant having this life with you. So would I, Grayson said, his voice rough with emotion. 1,000 times over. They walked slowly back to the house, moving with the care of people who knew their bodies were no longer young but whose spirits were still vital and strong. On the porch, they paused to look back at the land one more time. We built something good here, Grayson said, something that will last long after we are gone. We did, Sienna agreed. But more than that, we built a love that will last forever. That is the real legacy. Inside, they prepared for bed in the routine perfected over 42 years of marriage. Sienna brushed out her hair, now more silver than brown. Grayson checked the locks, moving more stiffly than he once had. They met in the middle of the bed, gravitating toward each other as always. I love you, Grayson said, the words as fresh and true as the first time he had spoken them. I love you, Sienna replied, her heart as full as it had been on their wedding day. As they drifted off to sleep, wrapped in each other's arms, the Montana night settled over the ranch. The chickens slept peacefully in their coop, safe and fed, as they had been every night for 43 years, thanks to the love story that had begun with a forgotten bucket of feed and a kind-hearted woman who could not bear to let them go hungry. And in the master bedroom of the ranch house, two people who had found each other against all odds dreamed of chickens and midnight meetings and all the ways that love, once kindled, could light up a lifetime. Years continued to pass in the peaceful rhythm of ranch life. Grayson and Sienna watched their grandchildren grow, some staying to work the ranch, others venturing out into the wider world. They saw technologies change, electricity coming to the ranch in 1927, the first telephone installed in 1928. But through all the changes, Their love remained constant. On a spring morning in 1930, Sienna woke to find Grayson sitting on the edge of the bed, holding his chest. She was at his side in an instant, fear flooding through her. "It is all right," he said, though his face was pale. "Just a pain, it will pass." But it did not pass. The doctor, summoned urgently, examined him and took Sienna aside with a grave expression. Grayson's heart was failing. It could be days or weeks or months, but the end was coming. Sienna refused to believe it at first. Grayson had been her rock for 47 years. The idea of life without him was incomprehensible. But as the weeks passed, and he grew weaker despite their best efforts, she had to face the reality. Thomas moved his parents into the main house, so Sienna would not have to care for Grayson alone. The children and grandchildren visited daily, filling the house with love and noise and life. But Sienna's focus was entirely on her husband, making sure he was comfortable, spending every possible moment by his side. On a warm June evening with the sun setting over the Montana mountains, Grayson called Sienna to his bedside. She sat beside him, taking his weathered hand in hers. "I need to tell you something," he said, his voice weak but determined. "Save your strength," Sienna said, tears already forming. "No," Grayson insisted. "I need you to know. These 47 years with you have been the greatest gift of my life. You made me happier than I ever thought possible. You gave me children and grandchildren and a love that sustained me through everything. I have no regrets, Sienna, not a single one." "I have no regrets either," Sienna said, her voice breaking. "Except that I wish we had more time. A lifetime is not enough." "We were lucky to get as much as we did," Grayson said. He managed a weak smile. "Do you remember the chickens?" Sienna laughed through her tears. "How could I forget?" "You never let me forget. Promise me something," Grayson said urgently. "Promise me you will keep feeding them. Every evening like you did that first night. I want you to remember us there in that moment when everything began." "I promise," Sienna whispered. "I will feed them every evening and I will remember you. Always." "And promise me you will not stop living," Grayson said, his eyes intense on her face. "You still have years ahead of you, Sienna. Live them fully. Take joy in the grandchildren. Travel more if you want. Do not shut yourself away in grief." "I promise," Sienna said, though she could not imagine wanting to do anything but mourn when he was gone. Grayson relaxed back against the pillows. "Good. That is all I needed to hear." He paused. "Will you lie with me? I want to hold you one more time." Sienna carefully climbed into the bed beside him, fitting herself against his side as she had done thousands of times before. Grayson's arm came around her, weak but sure. "I love you, Sienna Walsh Cross," he said softly. "Thank you for noticing. Thank you for caring. Thank you for choosing me." "I love you, Grayson Xavier Cross," Sienna replied, using his full name as she rarely did. "Thank you for seeing me. Thank you for loving me. Thank you for 47 perfect years." They lay together as the sun set, painting the room in shades of gold and pink. Their children and grandchildren came in to say goodbye, tears flowing freely. But always Sienna stayed by his side, her hand in his. As night fell and the stars came out over Montana, Grayson took his final breath. Sienna felt him go, felt the moment his spirit left his body, and for a long moment she could not breathe herself. Then the grief hit, a tidal wave of pain that threatened to drown her. But even in her anguish she remembered her promise. She would live. She would take joy. She would honor his memory by continuing to embrace the life they had built together. The funeral was 3 days later, attended by what seemed like half of Helena and the surrounding ranches. Grayson had been respected and loved by many, and they came to pay their respects. Sienna stood surrounded by her children and grandchildren, their support keeping her upright when all she wanted was to collapse. They buried him on the ranch, on a hill overlooking the land he had loved so much. As Sienna stood by the grave, she thought of that first night, of a lonely cowboy who had forgotten to feed his chickens and a lonely woman who had cared enough to help. From that small kindness had grown a love that had sustained them both for nearly half a century. The first days without Grayson were the hardest. Sienna would turn to tell him something and remember he was not there. She would reach for him in the night and find the bed empty and cold. She would go to pour his coffee in the morning and have to pour it back, tears streaming down her face. But she had made him a promise, and she intended to keep it. Every evening, just as the sun was setting, she walked out to the chicken coop and fed the birds. She would stand there in the spot where they had met, remembering his face in the moonlight, the sound of his voice, the feeling of his hand in hers. "I miss you," she would tell the evening air. "Every moment of every day I miss you, but I am still here, still living as you asked me to. I hope you are proud." As the months passed, the sharp edge of grief dulled into a persistent ache that Sienna learned to carry. She threw herself into life with her children and grandchildren, finding joy in their accomplishments and happiness. She took up some of Grayson's duties on the ranch, supervising the chicken operation that had brought them together. On their wedding anniversary in September of 1930, Sienna stood alone in the chicken yard and spoke to the man she loved. "47 years we had together," she said to the sunset. 47 years of love and laughter and life. It was not enough, my darling. It will never be enough. But I am grateful for every moment we had, every kiss, every conversation, every ordinary day. You made my life extraordinary, Grayson Cross, and I will love you until my last breath and beyond. She lived on for another 12 years, surrounded by love and family. She saw grandchildren marry and great-grandchildren born. She took a trip to New York City with Sarah, marveling at the tall buildings and crowded streets, but always glad to return to Montana. She wrote down the story of how she and Grayson had met, wanting future generations to know how it had all begun. On a spring evening in 1942, at the age of 81, Sienna went out to feed the chickens as she had done every evening for 60 years. She stood in the yard, scattering feed when she felt a presence beside her. She turned and saw Grayson, young and strong as he had been that first night, smiling at her. "I have been waiting for you," he said, holding out his hand. Sienna looked down and saw her own hand was young again, the wrinkles and age spots gone. She took his hand without hesitation, feeling the rightness of it settle into her bones. "I kept my promise," she said. "I lived. I took joy. I fed the chickens every evening and remembered you." "I know," Grayson said softly. "I was always with you, Sienna. Every morning, every evening, every moment, I never left you." "I never felt alone," Sienna admitted. "Even after you were gone, I felt you here with me." "Come," Grayson said, tugging her hand gently. "We have all of eternity now. No more partings, no more pain. Just us, together forever." Sienna went with him gladly, leaving behind the body that had served her well for 81 years. Behind her, the chickens continued to peck at their feed, unaware that the woman who had cared for their ancestors for 6 decades had just taken her final breath. Thomas found her the next morning, lying peacefully in the chicken yard with a smile on her face. He wept, but he also smiled, knowing his mother had gone exactly where she would have wanted to, in the place where her great love story had begun. They buried Sienna beside Grayson on the hill, their graves side by side overlooking the ranch they had built together. The entire family gathered for the funeral, 4 generations coming together to celebrate a woman who had lived her life with grace and love and kindness. "Tell us about Grandma and Grandpa," the great-grandchildren asked their parents that evening as the family gathered after the funeral. And so the story was told once more, the tale of a cowboy who forgot to feed his chickens and a woman who noticed and cared enough to help. Of a midnight meeting that changed two lives. Of a love that had sustained them through 47 years of marriage and 12 years of separation, and would continue forever in the hearts of those who came after. The ranch continued to thrive, passed down through the generations, always with chickens in the yard and love in the house. And on quiet evenings, when the sun was setting over the Montana mountains, sometimes people would swear they could see two figures standing by the chicken coop, hands linked, watching over the land they had loved and the family they had created. The story of Sienna and Grayson became family legend, told and retold to each new generation. Children would visit the graves on the hill and lay wildflowers, thanking the great-great-grandparents they had never met for building the foundation of the family. Couples would stand in the chicken yard and promise to love each other as deeply and truly as Sienna and Grayson had loved. Because in the end, that was the real legacy, not the land or the money or the successful ranch. The real legacy was the love, the kind of deep, abiding, transformative love that starts with a simple act of kindness and grows into something that shapes generations. All because a lonely woman noticed that a lonely man had forgotten to feed his chickens at midnight and cared enough to help. And that care, that small kindness in the darkness, had lit a flame that would burn forever, lighting the way for everyone who came after with the simple truth that love, real love, can begin in the most unexpected places and last for all eternity. The chickens were always fed after that, every evening without fail, a tradition maintained by every generation that came after. It was a small thing, really, feeding chickens. But it was also everything, a daily reminder that the smallest acts of kindness can change the course of lives, that noticing someone when they are struggling and reaching out a hand can create a love story for the ages. And somewhere beyond the veil in whatever comes after this life, Sienna and Grayson walked hand in hand through fields of gold, their love story complete, their legacy secure, their hearts finally and forever home.